"Help me, sister," my niece Jenny said with tears in her eyes as she gave me a picture. It showed my brother, Jenny's dad, with his friends at a bar. "What's wrong, Jenny?" I asked. Before she could answer, my serious sister-in-law showed up. "What are you two doing?" she asked sternly, taking Jenny away. Alone now, I looked at the back of the picture and saw a message from my brother. It said, "If something happens to me, please take care of my daughter. My name is Alice. I'm a 32-year-old working in my family's construction company office. My older brother, who's 10 years older than me, was always seen as the one who would run the business someday. He's a hard worker, but he never seemed keen on taking over. Even though everyone, including me, thought he would, he often said, 'I enjoy carpentry, but I don't want to run the business.' It became his mantra, repeated over and over. Then one day, he dropped a bombshell. 'I found someone I want to marry,' he announced, introducing us to Maggie. She was lively and quickly became part of our family even though she didn't live with us. 'I'm getting married and moving out,' he declared. 'But what about the business?' I asked. 'You know you're expected to take over, right?' He sighed, patting my head gently. 'I don't want to cause you any trouble with Dad. We don't see eye to eye,' he explained. True to his word, he married soon after and moved out. But he always stayed in touch, chatting with me about everyday stuff. Guess what? Maggie made a delicious dinner tonight. She's a dietitian, so she keeps an eye on my high blood pressure, he'd say. I'd tease him, saying, 'You never get tired of bragging about her, do you?' But seeing him happy was all that mattered to me. A few years after my brother got married, his daughter Jenny was born. After that, we started seeing them more often. They looked really happy, and Jenny was growing up well loved by both her parents. When Jenny turned 10, there were talks in the family about patching things up with my brother. We hoped we could laugh together like we used to, but that hope didn't come true. One day while I was at work, I got a rare call from my sister-in-law. It wasn't unusual to hear from my brother, but it was strange to hear from her. Worried, I answered the phone right away. "Hey, sister-in-law." "Oh, Alice, what's going on? It's not often I hear from you. Calm down and listen. Your brother Jake had an accident at work. He fell from scaffolding because of the rain." The news hit me hard. I felt like time stopped. I called our parents, who were also at work, and we rushed to the hospital in the pouring rain. When we entered the hospital room, my brother looked so pale. Seeing him like that made the reality of the phone call sink in, and I collapsed to the floor. "Bro," I managed to say weakly, surprised by how feeble my voice sounded, and sadness washed over me. Beside the bed, my brother's wife was crying loudly, like the main character in a sad story. Her crying was so intense that it made me hold back my tears and just stare at her, feeling uneasy about her behavior. Jenny, standing next to her, looked down, her face pale, not crying but trembling as if she were scared of something. "Jenny, are you okay?" She didn't seem able to answer, still in shock from her father's death. After the wake for my brother at our home, as the relatives were grieving deeply, I found myself quietly crying in a secluded corner of the porch. The photo in the memorial portrait looked recent. My brother seemed a bit tired, but peaceful. I wondered if he had been happy. As I pondered this, I thought of Jenny. The last time we spoke, my brother, who adored his daughter, happily shared how he often took her to amusement parks and zoos. Jenny must be having a hard time after losing her dad. Thinking about her, tears filled my eyes again. But then I heard a familiar voice calling out to me. "Sis." It was Jenny, tears welling in her eyes. "Jenny, what's the matter?" I asked, wiping away my own tears, trying to stay calm. "Sis, I need your help. I'm scared. I think something bad might happen to me next." Before I could ask her to explain, she handed me something, nervously biting her lip. "Dad told me that if anything happened, I should give this to Alice," she said, repeating what our brother had told her. Jenny handed me a slightly worn brown envelope, which she had probably been holding onto for a while. "It's actually..." Just then, a cold voice interrupted us from behind, saying, "What are you doing?" I turned around to see my brother's wife, Maggie, looking stern. "I've been looking for you, Mama," Jenny said nervously. Maggie grabbed Jenny's arm and quickly took her away before I could say anything. Maggie had always been friendly and kind, but she seemed different now. It's understandable, given her husband's recent passing, but Jenny's behavior was also odd. Alone again, I opened the envelope and found an ordinary photograph inside. It looked like it was taken at a social event, with my brother smiling alongside some colleagues. I decided to flip the photo over. On the back, my brother's slightly angular handwriting read, "If anything happens to me, I want you to protect my daughter." I was shocked, speechless, just staring in surprise. I realized Jenny was asking for help, and this photo might be connected. So I decided to call a friend who was a police officer and arrange to meet him the next day. Usually the funeral would have been the day after the wake, but the crematorium wasn't available due to a certain day of the week, so we had an extra day. This gave me time to dig deeper into my brother's death. The next morning, when I got to our meeting spot, he was already there, waiting for me. "Sorry for calling you out of the blue." "Don't worry about it. I was off duty anyway. What's going on?" "Well, it's just..." I started to explain the situation to my friend, and he listened carefully. From a police standpoint, we can't take action based on just this evidence." "I understand. I wish I could do more. But remember, I'm here if you need to talk." "Yeah, thanks. Just talking it through helps me think." Even after saying goodbye to my friend, I couldn't stop thinking about the photo Jenny gave me. No matter how many times I looked at it, the message from my brother remained a puzzle. What else could I do to uncover a clue? The message alone didn't give me much to go on. I realized that talking to Jenny directly might be risky with my sister-in-law around. Then, an idea struck me. Maybe I could find something in my brother's belongings. Unable to sit still, I hurried to my sister-in-law's house. "I'm sorry to bother you during this difficult time. I just wanted to check on you and Jenny," I said as she answered the door. "Thank you for coming. Jenny's in her room, but she's not feeling too good since her dad passed," she replied, leading me to the living room. Despite her usual neatness, the house felt somber today. I don't see any of my brother's stuff here, and even a family photo that was here last time. There was no sign that my brother had ever been there. Determined to find something of his, I looked around the room. Maggie brought me some tea and homemade pickles. What caught my eye was a light purple bracelet similar to a rosary on Maggie's wrist. It didn't seem like something she or my brother would wear, and it made me uneasy as I thanked her for the tea and tasted the pickles. "These pickles are really salty, aren't they?" I remarked, quickly drinking my tea to wash down the extreme saltiness. But Maggie just tilted her head, saying, "Really? I don't think so." Maggie, a dietitian, usually made delicious and healthy meals that my brother loved. It was odd for her to make something so salty, especially knowing my brother's high blood pressure. Since I arrived, I've been feeling uneasy at Maggie's house, and I started worrying about Jenny. "I'd like to talk to Jenny. She's in her room, right?" Just as I stood up to go to her room. "No, you can't see her." "What? Why?" "I'm sorry, but you need to leave. I'm busy getting ready for the funeral," Maggie said firmly, grabbing my wrist and pushing me out into the hallway, then out of the house. Feeling frustrated after finding no clues, I looked up at the sky, wondering what to do next. Suddenly, Jenny appeared at a second-floor window. She gestured for me to be quiet and threw something at me. It was a small key wrapped in cute memo paper, the shed key. "Hide it under the potted plant after you use it," the note read. I gave Jenny a thumbs up, and she nodded before gently closing the window. To avoid my sister-in-law, I went to the backyard and used the key to open the shed. Inside, I found my brother's belongings, including a diary. Jake had been diligent about recording his daily life in a diary since he lived at home. As I read through it, I couldn't believe what I found. The food had become too salty, and even when he mentioned it, Maggie dismissed it, saying, "Trust me, I'm a dietitian," and he couldn't get her to take it seriously. His health had been declining because of it. Plus, he explained why he left that photo. The next day, a crowd gathered at the funeral, including relatives and Jake's colleagues. When Maggie took the microphone to speak, I stood up and interrupted her. "I need to say something," I announced. "Alice, what's going on?" Maggie looked surprised as I walked to the front of the room, ignoring her. "Jake didn't die by accident." My words caused a commotion in the hall, and Maggie's expression turned stern. "What are you saying?" "My husband slipped and fell off the scaffold at work," Maggie protested. "I showed everyone Jake's diary. It's all written here." My sister-in-law, who was usually a good cook, started making heavily seasoned dishes, and Jake's health started to decline. "Isn't it strange, Maggie? Serving salty food to Jake, who has high blood pressure, and insisting he eats it all." "I don't know what you're talking about. I always took care with his meals. Maggie insisted, trying to play innocent. Ignoring her, I presented another piece of evidence. This is a photo Jake left for me. At first, I didn't understand its significance, but when I visited your house yesterday, it became clear. The person in this photo is wearing a bracelet that matches the light purple one you're wearing. As I pointed to the person, everyone's attention shifted there. Mr. Johnson, you and Maggie were having an affair, weren't you? Even though you were a colleague Jake trusted, why betray him like this? As murmurs filled the hall, Maggie glared at me while the man looked pale and nervous. Mr. Johnson was a familiar face to me as well. He had been a good friend of Jake's since they graduated from high school and started working together. He had visited our house many times, and I had seen him wearing the same bracelet as Maggie's when he wiped sweat from his forehead. I'm sure Jake was struggling a lot, knowing that the colleague he trusted was having an affair with his wife, and that he might even be in danger. That's why he couldn't tell me directly, and leaving this photo was his way of trying to communicate. I said to Mr. Johnson, holding back tears. He broke down crying and held his head in his hands. What? A diary and a bracelet can't prove an affair or that I killed my husband, Maggie protested, getting defensive. But I was prepared and continued with the evidence from the diary. There's more. Jake checked your phone, Maggie, and found emails between you and Mr. Johnson. It seems you wrote, Jake is in the way of us being together. We need to get rid of him. That's not true. Whether it's a lie or not, we can easily find out by investigating, right? I challenge. At first, it seemed like you were planning to take advantage of my brother's high blood pressure to harm him through his meals. But that would take too long. So driven by your desire to get married as soon as possible, you approached Mr. Johnson to eliminate my brother in a workplace accident, didn't you? You planned to push him from a height on a rainy day, and if anyone asked, you'd just say he slipped. I never suggested such a thing. He's the one who brought it up. Maggie tried to deflect blame onto Mr. Johnson, pointing at him. He shook his head vigorously, denying it. Mr. Johnson, it was raining on the day my brother died, wasn't it? I asked. He nodded slightly. Usually work would be stopped on a rainy day, so why wasn't it? It was only drizzling and we had a deadline, so he suggested we continue with the work. I saw it as an opportunity, Mr. Johnson explained. My brother considered you his best friend and trusted you until the end. You know that, I said, addressing Mr. Johnson. There was a collective intake of breath as he bowed deeply towards Jenny, my brother's only daughter. I was led astray by her, and I did something terrible. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Johnson continued to apologize through tears. Jenny looked at him with sadness in her eyes. Meanwhile, Maggie kept denying any involvement. Even at this point, you'll hand over the incriminating emails to the police, right? I asked, and when Mr. Johnson offered his phone, Maggie seemed to finally give up. Then, a police officer friend who had attended my brother's funeral arrested the two of them and took them away. It was a relief to see them finally caught. Afterward, Maggie and Mr. Johnson received long prison sentences. Thanks to the lawyer I hired, Jenny received financial support from a program called the Victims Compensation Program, designed to help families of victims recover. Jenny was deeply affected by the incident and struggled for a while, but I adopted her as my own, and she's slowly starting to smile again. I've decided to give her all the love I can in place of my brother.